Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Got a bunch of questions about what happened yesterday in court with Brian Kohberger. In fact, some news outlets suggested that something so crazy and unusual happened in court yesterday that nobody had ever seen it before. And the first email I got about it said, Steve, what's going on here? And I said, it happens all the time. What are you talking about? Well, it just depends on which news outlet you were following. But it turns out that what happened yesterday does, in fact, happen all the time. And I'll explain that. But Brian Kohberger stood silent at his arraignment. What does it mean to stand silent? So this is from KREM. Selena Van Heining wrote this, and it says that onlookers, family members of the victims, and people around the world waited with bated breath for the murder suspect to plead guilty or not guilty to the charges against him. But he didn't do either. Instead, he chose to stand silent. And in some places, they refer to that as standing mute. It's extremely common. Extremely common. Remaining silent does not mean that a suspect is admitting guilt. It is simply that the judge will enter a not guilty plea to the charge that the person is facing. And so you have the right to remain silent. In fact, he would have been informed of that repeatedly up until now. Okay? You walk into court, how do you plead? Well, if you got the right to remain silent, you can just sit there like a bump on a log and not say anything. And so for years, and I'm talking about centuries, they've said that if somebody stands there and does not respond to the allegations against them at their arraignment, they have the right to remain silent, and that will be recorded as a not guilty plea because, as you recall, as you stand before there, you are not guilty. You're presumed to be not guilty until and unless you are convicted by a jury or a bench trial judge. But the point is, he's not guilty. So they enter the not guilty plea as he stands silent or stands mute. That's it. Happens all the time. It's routine. So this author, Selena Van Heining, went out and asked what, remaining silent means. And so he, of course, a 28-year-old man referring to Brian Kohberger, he's accused of murdering some students at their off-campus home back in 2022. He was arrested in Pennsylvania and extradited back for trial. He had his first appearance in court on January 5th. A week later, he appeared again, and he waived his right to a speedy preliminary hearing. That hearing was then scheduled to begin June 26th. It was supposed to last an entire week. However, news broke Tuesday that he had been indicted of all charges against him by a grand jury, which eliminates the need for a preliminary hearing. He appeared in court for his arraignment on Monday with his public defender. During the arraignment, the judge explained the charges to Kohberger and asked him to enter a plea, at which point his attorney stood up and said that he will stand silent. So at an arraignment, a suspect is asked to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty, which are the only pleas recognized in the state of Idaho. However, a suspect can also choose to stand silent or stand mute. It should actually say, however, defendant can choose to do so. According to Cornell Law School, remaining silent means a suspect does not take a stance on being guilty or not guilty. They simply refrain from speaking. And if a defendant refuses to enter a plea or decides to stand silent, the court must enter a not guilty plea on the suspect's behalf. I've actually seen people who say, I have the right to not enter a plea, and until I do, you can't put me on trial, implying that you could just sit in jail for the rest of your life and just say, I'm not going to plea. Well, I'm not sure what that would accomplish. If you're just sitting in jail for the rest of your life. The right for a suspect to remain silent is protected, of course, by the Fifth Amendment. It can't be said for sure why he made the decision to stand silent at his arraignment. However, there are several reasons why he or any other defendant might do so. The Fifth Amendment in the U.S. Constitution protects a defendant regardless of whether they are guilty or innocent. In fact, a defendant's refusal to testify or their decision to stand silent or stand mute can't be used against them during their trial. It's important to note that Kohberger's decision to stand silent does not mean he is admitting guilt to the crimes. It simply means the court is now responsible for entering a not guilty plea on his behalf. So his trial is scheduled to begin in October. Trial date being set also means the prosecution has 60 days to officially declare whether they will seek the death penalty or not. Now, I can tell you I looked up stand mute definition because that's what we do here in Michigan. The defendant can stand up, plead guilty, not guilty, or simply stand mute. And that's what they call it. And so at an arraignment, the defendant is asked how they plead. The defendant can plead guilty, not guilty, or stand mute. Standing mute means the defendant does not take a stance on being guilty or not guilty. They remain silent. Standing mute or remaining silent has the same effect as pleading not guilty. And the question is, why would anybody do this? And there are some crimes where a person could theoretically say, well, I never said I wasn't guilty, as if that might somehow impact sentencing. But when you're facing multiple counts of murder, I don't think how you pled to something will impact your sentencing. But I have to tell you that one TV station, and I'm not going to mention who they are, but one TV station interviewed a longtime trial attorney. Now, apparently she's a trial attorney in a different state. But she said she's never in her long career seen a defendant do what Brian Kohberger did in the courtroom Monday. And then it says here that he did not enter a guilty or not guilty plea. His public defender told the judge their client will be standing silent on pleas. And then this long-time trial attorney said, how unusual is that? Very. I've yet to see it in my career, which has been pretty long. And the claims person here is a former prosecutor. Now, it's possible that the state of Washington does not allow you to stand mute. I'm not sure how they would do that because you have the right to remain silent. What are they going to do if you don't talk? Start poking you with something? I mean, seriously. And I was so struck by that statement. How unusual is that? Very. I've yet to see it in my career, which has been pretty long, said the criminal and civil trial attorney, former prosecutor, and legal analyst. Never seen it before. The reason I'm laughing is I actually thought to myself, I'm pretty sure it's so common that I can find it on some forms that are filed in court. And so in Michigan, Supreme Court approved forms are called SCAO forms. And there's actually an SCAO form. It's form CC 261. And it applies to Michigan Court Rule 6.113C. And the title of it is Waiver of Arraignment and Election to Stand Mute or Enter Not Guilty Plea. So what this form is that if you got arrested for something and you hire an attorney, and the attorney calls you up and you're talking or you have a conference with your attorney, and your attorney says, look, there's several stages here that we're going to go through in your trial. So you have to go to an arraignment somewhere along the line where we're going to go into court, and the judge will read the charges against you and explain what that means, then ask you to enter a plea. Now, I can tell you right now what the charges are against you, and if we want to, we can waive that arraignment. We can skip it. We can skip it. You might say, Steve, why would you want to skip your arraignment? Well, it's a formality, and it costs you money if you're paying your attorney. So if you can hire an attorney who can say, by the way, I can save us one court appearance by filing a piece of paper, there's a good chance you're going to say, oh, okay, let's do that. So you fill out the waiver of arraignment and election to stand mute or enter a not guilty plea, and you fill the form out, and then down at the bottom, at number 5, you have the choice. You can plead not guilty, or you can stand mute to the charge. And so you can literally stand mute without going into court and standing up. But that's how common it is that we've got it baked into our forms here in Michigan. And I believe this is true in most other states. If it's not true in Washington state, then I guess that I can understand why that legal analyst who's a longtime expert who's handled criminal trials, why she's never heard of it. But, the weird part is that I remember this coming up in law school. And so, I remember all kinds of stuff from law school. Law school for me was 32 years ago. Now, it's possible that she's been practicing longer than I have, and maybe Washington, like I said, doesn't recognize standing silent or standing mute. I don't know. I did try to do some cursory looks into whether or not Washington state allows it. But unfortunately, right now, if you type the phrase stand mute or stand silent into Google, no matter what else you put in there, you get all kinds of stuff about this case. And so that wasn't going to be very helpful as I was doing the research on this late last night. So there you go. Standing silent or standing mute literally means that it's simply the court's going to enter a not guilty plea on his behalf. It's something well within his right to do. It's well within your right if you're ever accused of a crime in the United States. And it's so common, like I said, it's built into forms we have here that you file with the court, and it is simply recognized as one of the alternatives that you can do. And like I said, the form is just there to save you some time. So there you go. But Brian Kohberger stood silent at his arraignment. That's what it means to stand silent, and it is not unusual, at least in the states that I'm aware of. Selena Van Heining wrote that for KREM. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Do not take life too seriously. You will never get out alive.